Hello everyone and welcome to the next video in the series. This is a technical skills video and the topic is on expressions that involve integers. I have about 8 problems, 8 examples that I will walk you through to explain how you work with expressions in an efficient and meaningful way. Now, to begin, let me remind you of what an expression is. The definition of it remains the same as the one that we had with natural numbers. It is a meaningful sequence of numbers, operations, and also you could also have quantity symbols because they also represent the values of quantities and therefore can be present in a mathematical expression. Some examples of expressions are 4 plus 5, so that's a very simple expression. Even a number on its own, like 4, would be considered an expression as well. Here's another one. Negative 8 plus 3 times negative 2. We have negative 3 times bracket 2 plus 3 times 4 minus 4 times bracket negative 3 times 2 minus 1. And now we have expressions that involve division. Negative 48 divided by 3 times 8 plus negative 15 divided by 5. Okay, so we call these expressions, and it's important to notice that not just any sequence counts as an expression. So for example, if I wrote let's say 4 and then plus times, this is also a sequence of numbers and operations, but it doesn't count as an expression because it's not quite clear what we need to do. So that's what we mean by meaningful. This is a very important part of the definition, that the expression should be meaningful. Now, when we say meaningful, we have to sort of be careful about what we mean by that. Meaningful means that the operations and the numbers that are involved in an expression are sequenced in such a way that the expression can be worked out. So for example, I can add 4 and 5 and get 9. So in the end, we should be able to do the additions, subtractions, multiplications, divisions and such, and other operations. And in the end, we should be able to come up with one final answer for the expression. Okay. Now, in order to work out an expression, of course, the most common approach that's used these days is BEDMAS. And in the next video, I'm going to give you 7 reasons why you should give up on BEDMAS. A much better approach is to use the technique that I introduced in the video on natural numbers, and this is the analysis synthesis technique. Just a reminder as to what the steps are. In order to evaluate an expression, we have 2 major stages. The first stage is where we analyze the expression, and by this we mean you break it down into its logical components, and you break the components into their logical components and so on, until you arrive at the smallest components, which are either numbers or quantity symbols. Now, the analysis or breaking down begins by breaking the expression into terms, and for this we use additions and subtractions outside brackets to break the expression into terms. And then within terms, we break each term into factors, and factors are things that you multiply. Now, sometimes factors you may be able to break factors down as well, and if that's the case, we will do that as well. We're going to see a couple of examples where we have to take step 3 here. All right, so the objective of analyzing an expression is to sort of figuring out how it was put together and what the person who wrote it meant by it. Once we know how it is put together, then we can start with the smallest values. Those are the numbers or quantity symbols, and then start to work our way backwards. So this is now the synthesis stage, where we synthesize the expression as a whole by starting with the bits and pieces and putting it back together. As we go along the process of putting it back together, we also perform any operations that can be performed. There are 3 steps in this one as well. So we start now with the bottom part. We evaluate the factors. Then we evaluate the terms by multiplying the factors. Now, here is what's added, what we have to add when we introduce integers into the game. Here we talked about when we multiply and divide, we talked about a very efficient approach where we find the sign and then we find the magnitude. And then following this, we evaluate the expression by adding and subtracting the terms. And again, we will follow the algorithm that I introduced earlier, where if you're doing the work by hand, of course, you would add all of your gains and then add all of your losses and then subtract the total loss from the total gain. And at the very last stage, we will work out the sign and then we work out the magnitude. Okay, time to look at some examples. Example 1, we have -8 plus 3 times -2. Now there is addition outside brackets here, and there is only this that's outside brackets, and therefore the expression breaks into two terms. And these are now, before I show you the two terms, let me also tell you a little bit about the notation, why the use of brackets. This is actually a very good point to talk about this. Suppose that you have a long expression such as -8, let's say times -2, and I'm not using brackets, bad style, and then times -3, then plus -2, let's say times 5 times -1, then we have subtract +4, and then times -5. Okay, now if you take a look at this expression, and let me bring it up a bit. All right, if you take a look at this expression, it's pretty tough, or at least annoying, for me to try to find out how many terms I have. I definitely cannot just look at it and say, 2 terms or 3 terms. Whereas if I use a different kind of notation, so let's say I use the notation where we use brackets, and I put down -8, and then I have multiplied by -2, then we multiply this by -3, and then I put a bit of space, then add -2, and then we multiply this by 5, and then we multiply this by -1, and then a bit of space, subtract, then again a bit of space, +4, and then we multiply this by -5. Okay, so these two expressions are the same, except you can tell much easier, it is much easier to tell with the bottom expression that we have 3 terms, because all of the negative signs and positive signs are within brackets here, and anything that's outside brackets, like this subtraction and this addition, these are operations. So I can just look at this and tell term number 1, term number 2, term number 3. And remember, we write things so we can communicate. Like, there is no point in writing something that takes minutes for me to work out. And even if I work it once and look at it again, I forget what I had done, and I forget that we had 3 terms, but this is quite clear. All right. Okay, so we were working with examples, and let's remove all of these additional stuff. There we go. Okay, so here we have an addition, and the expression breaks into 2 terms. So I'm going to show the terms by putting boxes around them. All right, hopefully you don't have to do this. I'm using this as a teaching tool, but you should not rely on having to draw boxes to be able to tell the terms. Now, in order to work this out, we work out, now each one has each one has factors inside. So we have done step 1, 1. And now we move to step 1, 2. Here we break each term into factors. Now factors, I'm going to use, I guess I can use shading to show you the factors. So for term number 1, there is only one factor, and this one is, as you see it here now. And then term number 2, there are 2 things that we are multiplying. One of them is 3, so that's factor number 1. And then the other one is -2, and this is factor number 2. So now we have broken the expression into terms, and we broke each term into factors. And if we can break factors further, then we will do that. But in this case, there is nothing to do. Each factor is just a number, and there is nothing more we can do to that number on its own. All right, so now what we do is we work out, we go to stage number 2 and synthesize. Evaluate the factors, they're already done. Evaluate the terms by multiplying the factors. Sign followed by magnitude. Okay, so term number 1 is just -8. For term number 2, there is only one negative sign. Now, if this was a subtraction, I would count that one as well. But right now, overall, there is one negative sign, so the overall sign will be negative. And then we multiply 3 by 2 to get the magnitude 6. So what we would write down is -8. So that would be for term number 1. And then for term number 2, we work out the sign, which is minus. And then we multiply 3 by 2 to get 6. So that's how we will see this. Okay. So our next line then becomes -8 minus 6. And then we move on to step number 3, evaluate the expression by adding and subtracting the terms. Again, we do the sign followed by magnitude. Here we have two losses in a row, so we can say that the sign will be minus. And then, because they are both losses, we find the total loss, which is 14, and the answer will be -14. Okay, so that's it for problem number 1. Let's move on to problem number 2. Problem number 2 says -3 times -4 minus -2 times 8. And this one as well has two terms, and these are, there is one subtraction outside brackets, and it breaks the expression into two terms. Term number 1 is -3 times -4. Term number 2 is -2 times 8. Now again, I'm going to show you the factors. The first factor is -3, and the second factor is 4. So term number 1 has two factors. Now in term number 2, we also have two factors. The first one is -2, and the second one is 8. And there you have the terms and the factors for this expression. Okay, now the factors don't break down. Again, like problem number 1, each factor is just a number, and there is nothing more that we can do to that number. And therefore, we move on to step 1 of the synthesis stage. Evaluate the factors. They're already done. Evaluate the terms by multiplying the factors. Sign followed by magnitude. So here we have negative times negative, and that will be positive, so we're not going to write plus. We can skip that. And then we ignore the sign now, and we multiply 3 by 4 to get 12. Now following this, for the next term, we have two negatives. You see, I'm counting the subtraction as a negative here. This combines the rules that we had earlier for addition and subtraction of integers and multiplication and division of integers. It combines the two of them into one, and therefore it does work if when you count your negatives, if you count any subtraction that sits on the left side of the term as 1. With two negatives, we end up with a plus, and so we write down plus. And then we ignore the signs, and we multiply 2 by 8 to get 16. And so the next line will be 12 plus 16. And there we go. Now we can add them and finish the problem. Problem number 3. -5 times -6 times -2 plus -7 times 3 times -2. The terms are these ones. There are two of them. And again, it's and actually this should have been an addition, or maybe the first problem should have been a subtraction perhaps. So let me correct that one. Alright, there we go. Okay, so what we have is two terms. The subtraction here breaks it down into two terms, term number 1 and term number 2. Term number 1 has 3 factors. Now this time I'm not going to highlight them, so you don't get too used to the idea of the need to highlight. These factors are -5, -6, and -2. These are the 3 things that we are multiplying, so they are factors. And in term number 2 we also have 3 factors, -7, 3, and -2. Okay, for each one now we work out the sign, and then we work out the magnitude. Term number 1 has 3 negatives, so it will be negative. And then 5 times 6 times 2. 5 times 6 is 30. 30 times 2 is 60. So term number 1 will be -60. Term number 2 also has 3 negatives, including the subtraction. There is 1, 2, 3. And therefore it will be a minus. And now that we have worked out the sign, we ignore the signs and we multiply 7 by 3 by 2. 7 times 3 is 21, and 21 times 2 is 42. So we get -60 minus 42. And now we have 2 losses in a row, and therefore we have a net loss whose size is the sum of the 2 losses. So we add 60 and 42 to get a total loss of 102. And so the answer is -102. Problem number 4. Now here again we have one subtraction outside brackets, and therefore we end up with 2 terms. Term number 1 is -2 times the bracket, and term number 2 is 3 times the bracket. And here they are with boxes around them. Now for this one, I would like to actually show you the factors. Factor number 1 is -2, and there it is. Factor number 2 is all of the bracket, and there you have factor number 2. And in term number 2, we also have 2 factors. The first one is 3, and then the next one is the bracket. And there's factor number 2 in term number 2. Now here is when we have to go to the third step of stage 1, where if we can break factors further, we will do that. Factor number 1 cannot be broken because it's just a number. Factor number 2 though breaks into 2 terms. These are -3 and 2 times 4. We work them out. So on the next line we write down -3 plus 8. And same thing over here. Factor number 2 breaks into 2 terms, and we work out the terms to get -8 plus 1. Here's the next line. So let's take a look again. Factor number 1 stays. Factor number 2 now becomes -3 plus 8. And here 3 stays, and factor number 2 becomes -8 plus 1. Okay, we finished factor number 2. And so -3 plus 5 becomes 5, and -8 plus 1 becomes -7. Now we are working out the factors. Once the factors have been worked out, then we work out the terms. Term number 1 will be -10. Term number 2 has 2 negatives, so it becomes plus 21, which comes from 3 times 7. So now we have -10 plus 21. We have a loss of 10 followed by a gain of 21. Because the gain is larger, it will be positive. And because the two are opposite, have opposite effects, we subtract to get 11. Problem number 5. Now we have one big term. There are no additions or subtractions outside brackets, and therefore this whole thing is one term. Now of course inside it you have a -1 here, and then another factor which is the big bracket. So -1 is one factor, and then the bracket, the square brackets make the second factor. The second factor breaks into 2 terms, with the plus in between breaking it down into -2 times the bracket and 4 times the bracket. So we work out each of these terms, and to work them out we have to work out the factor that's brackets. So we do 3 minus 6, and then here we do 5 minus 8. Okay, so that's our next line. And we finish this factor now to get -3, and we finish this factor to get -3 as well. Now we finish this term to get +6 because there are 2 negatives. And we finish this term to get -12. There is only 1 negative. And now 6 minus 12 is negative 6 because there is a smaller gain compared to the loss. And negative 6 is positive 6. Problem number 6. Here we have 3 terms. And here they are. And now to work them out, term number 1 has 2 negatives, it becomes positive 3. Term number 2 has 1 negative, it becomes minus 7. Term number 3 has 2 negatives, and it becomes plus 2. So once again, 2 negatives make a plus. There is 1 negative, we get minus 7. And 2 negatives, we get plus 2. And then we can work this out by arguing that we add 3 and 2 first to get a total of 5. And then we subtract 7 to get negative 2. Okay, problem 7. Now this one has 3 terms. The subtraction here and the addition here, break it down into 3 terms. Term number 1 can be worked out pretty quickly. 2 negatives make a positive, and 5 times 3 is 15. Term number 2 has 2 factors. 2 is 1, and the brackets are the second factor. The second factor has 2 terms, and we work those out to find negative 6 minus 5. And term number 3 can be simplified to just minus 4. Okay, so now we have 15 for term number 1. 2 has to wait until the second factor is done, and the second factor has 2 terms. So we get negative 6 minus 5. And then this becomes minus 4. We still have to work out the second term. And within the second term, we have to work out the second factor. Negative 6 minus 5 gives us negative 11. That's 2 losses in a row for a total loss of 11. And then we have, we now count the negative and the negative. There are 2 negatives. That gives me a plus. And 2 times 11 is 22. So now we have 15 plus 22 minus 4. 15 plus 22 is 37. And if you subtract 4 from it, you get 38. And here we come with the last example, which has division in it. Now we have 2 terms. These are negative 48 divided by 3 times 8 and negative 15 divided by 5. Term number 1 has only 1 negative, so we write minus. And then we ignore the sign and we divide 48 by 3 and then divide by 8, and that gives us a 2. Term number 2 has 1 minus overall, so it will be minus. And 15 divided by 5 is 3. So our next line is negative 2 minus 3. And this is 2 losses in a row, and it gives us a total loss of 5. Okay, everyone, so that's it with expressions. And thanks again, as usual, for watching. And don't forget the next video, 7 reasons why you should give up on BEDMAS. I'll see you then, and for now, I'll be gone in 3, 2, 1.